when you first joined, you joined because you knew there was going to be a draft. So you thought, I'm going to pick the service I want to be.
Exactly.
Why in the world would you pick that?
Well, it was a little bit glamorous. The white scarf and goggles,
Right.
That idea. And as a matter of fact, before Pearl Harbor, my best friend and I had just graduated from high school. And we saw the war clouds over Europe. England was pressing President Roosevelt desperately to get involved. And he couldn't do so because he did not have the support of the public. And he knew that. So he had to resist it. But we were enthralled with flying, and we wanted to fly. And so my friend and I thought, well, the smartest thing we could do would be to go to Canada and learn to fly with the British. And then once America did become involved, as we were pretty sure it would eventually, we could transfer and we'd be ahead of all our contemporaries because we'd already have our commission and our wings.
Why didn't that happen?
And we thought that was pretty cool.
Right, yeah.
And so we took the plan home to his mother. He was an only child. His dad had been mustard gassed in the First World War and died a horrible death. And Sully, which was his name was Leroy Sullivan, never knew his dad. He was all his mother had. And she looked at him and listened and said, well, Sully, if you really feel like this is what you must do, then you have my blessing. Well, I naturally thought that I'd get much the same reaction when I took it home to my dad or mother. And when I did, and my mother found out that Mrs. Sullivan had agreed to let her only offspring go because we had to have parental consent.
Yeah.
We were underage.
Right.
And she said, well, you have my blessing. And when my mother found out, she said, well, I hate to see you do this, but if you feel you must, when Mrs. Sullivan agrees, then I can't stand in your way. But you have to convince your father. Well, when my dad came home and he heard the plan, he said, you blithering idiots. You have no idea what you're getting into or what you're doing. And over my dead body would I give you my consent. You get back in school. And so I went to college, and my friend went to Canada. And he went all the way through the training on Spitfires and went through the North African campaign and survived. And meanwhile, Pearl Harbor occurred. And then there wasn't any question. I was cannon fodder. I was proper age and position, and I wanted to fly, so I joined the aviation cadets, and what training I got.
Yeah, I was going to say, we didn't train. I mean, you weren't really prepared to look at that.
No.
Not prepared for this. What?
Heavens, no. There was no way to really prepare us for it, but nevertheless, something happened to the Bloody Hundredth that didn't happen to any other group. And this was one of the things that I was very interested in seeing whether Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg picked up on, because I told them about it. And I said, this should be documented because it happened only in the 100th Bomb Group. And that is that they took 40 members of my flying school class in Valdosta, Georgia, me included, directly from flying school and sent us to the 100th Bomb Group as co-pilots. They pulled all the co-pilots out. Now, mind you, those crews had already gone through pre-flight training for 4 months.
Together,
as a unit, 10-man crews. The co-pilot's the second in command of the crew.
Right.
If anything happens to the pilot, the co-pilot has to take over. That's a heck of a responsibility. And
you need the crew to act as one.
yes. And the crew I happened to be assigned to personally took a very dim view. Some members of the crew, particularly the navigator and the bombardier, that this young shavetail that didn't have any knowledge of the B-17, never been in a B-17 before, four-engine airplane, he didn't have any idea what he was doing, would be somebody they would have to follow orders from. And so they proceeded to make my life hell. They did everything in the world to get me to discourage me and force me to resign or ask for a transfer and go somewhere else because they loved the co-pilot they had before.
Right.
He was a buddy. They partied together and drank together, and they were very fond of each other. The pilot never interfered.
Is this why there was so much bloodshed in this bomber group?
I am convinced that it is a major reason why it was. I can't say for sure, but I know that because of our inexperience.
Why did they do that?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows who ordered it or why they did it. And so I said, well, this documentary ought to reveal that. It didn't, sadly.
I do remember one co-pilot getting in and the new groups coming in and just being totally green and getting the impression they have absolutely no idea what they're walking into. What was the average lifespan of a pilot or anybody on the
Initially,
B-17?
when the Hundredth began operations in June of '43, the average longevity of a crew was 4 missions.
The entire crew.
The entire group. And as you said, we lost 77% of that original group in the first 90 days of operation.
Jeez.
And so if you dwelt on your chances of surviving
you were done.
25, you were through.
Yeah.
You were done.
How did you, just watching it, and so I don't, I'm watching it. I don't have the adrenaline. My life is not at risk. But watching it and then seeing the portrayal in one scene where the new pilot, just sits on the ground like shell-shocked, and knowing you're going to have to do this again tomorrow. How did you mentally deal with that? How did you, the psychological pressure?
Truthfully,
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly don't know how we did it. I only know that the pressure was so great to do the job that we were sent there to do. Peer pressure had a lot to do with it.
Didn't want to
Others were doing it, so why should you not do it? And I recognize that now. I didn't at the time. But we were so focused on following orders and going out in broad daylight, despite the British pleading with us not to. The British said, you're suicidal. You can't sustain your losses. But we did it anyway.
And again, why did we do that?
Well, this was the conviction on the part of our command, General Acre, that high altitude, daylight, precision bombing, as he called it, which was a laugh, really a laugh, was the best way to utilize our bomber force. And of course, in reality, America was in a prime position to replace our losses we outproduced the world with impunity. We weren't being attacked all around the clock like the Germans and the Japanese. So we could train and we could build, and we did. And that was the grossest miscalculation on the part of Hitler
Yeah.
that could be imagined.
By 40,
He didn't believe we could do that.
well, it was a miracle. By 43,
And we didn't know we could do it.
correct.
But that brings up the point that I wish to make, and that is that I don't understand why in the world we've never acknowledged the tremendous contribution that those who were not in uniform made to our victory.
There is an absolute must-read called America's Forge. And it tells the story of how unprepared we were and how on a dime, because I think it was the guy who ran Chevrolet, was put in charge and told the president, I've got to run this. This can't be run through committee. I've got to run this. And
Knudsen.
Yes, incredible what was happening here.
Yes, absolutely.
So, was there a time where you thought, I can't do this another day? I just can't.
Not me personally, but I was pushed into a position eventually of being an operations officer of my squadron. And that meant that I was second in command of the squadron. I was still a second lieutenant.
Wow.
But I was the only one left, and I had more combat experience than anybody else. I had 22 missions in. And so the commanding officer said, okay, Lucky, you're the guy right in front of me had been my successor, or I succeeded him. And he was a captain, and he got shot down and killed right in front of me because they exploded. And so when I landed, he said, you're the new operations officer. Well, in that position, I had to evaluate all the other crews in the squadron as to whether they were combat fatigued or combat ready, where they flew, when they flew, and make up their crews and give them assignments. And I said, this is going to be awfully awkward because I'm only a shavetail. I'm a second lieutenant. And I'm telling captains and majors and lieutenant colonels where they're going to fly and when. And he said, we'll give you all the support you need, and we'll advance you as rapidly as we can. And in the combat zone, that was every 90 days you could be promoted.
Wow.
And so I was already in for first lieutenant, and I got that at the end of that month. But nevertheless, you ask if I ever had misgivings about whether or not I was going to make it. I didn't let myself do that. I knew that if I dwelt on it, that I'd be done.